economist from Liberty, a consumer economist. That's pretty depressing. At the moment, are these retail sales any hope, or is it something masking the disease underneath, I guess?
No, nothing much masking it, Francis. The jump in the June numbers was counterintuitive, given that disposable income is under severe pressure. And the retail credit numbers didn't show a major increase on how this was financed. So I tend to agree with the Investec view that it was mainly due to the year-on-year increase distortion from last year's slow sales. But
why was there slow sales last year? So you're saying we're comparing this year to last year?
So last year would have been, given the fact that, the start of pressures on South African consumers didn't start this year. It should have been some factors. I can't correctly remember what it is that happened, particularly in the month of June 2014. But generally, consumers have been under pressure since I think the end of the financial recession. We haven't really seen a recovery of consumer spending. You'll recall, Francis, that if you calculate GDP from the expenditure side, you'll find that consumption expenditure is about 60% of that. That hasn't really been the driver of GDP in the past few years. And the concern is that if you see retail numbers at their highest, which seems to be their peak, and going to see a decline going forward, GDP is going to be under even more pressure because South African consumers have been boosting spending. So on the supply side, we know there are weaknesses in the mining sector and the manufacturing sector based on things both internally and externally. So if we don't see consumers spending more as they ought to be spending, we're going to see a lot of pressure coming onto GDP.
So what you're pointing to is the fact that this economy has been so reliant in the past on shopping. We've been a shopping economy, but the ANC, something that they're looking at, and we will speak to them tomorrow as well, is how do we move from a shopping economy to an economy that makes things, to export them to other markets? Is that more and more urgent?
So it's more and more urgent, but remember, to be an economy that manufactures and export means, by definition, you have to be a competitive economy. That means your productivity in the labor market has to commensurately increase. You're not going to be competitive if you're going to sell at higher price because your input costs, including labor, is much higher. So you need to have workers being paid fair salaries, but the productivity rate has to increase as well. I don't think we are very inclined to increase productivity other than just looking at the wage level without linking it to how the economy is doing, how productive the economy is. It's a fair, it's a noble ideal to have to be an exporter. But there are other factors in the market
how do you get there?
We talked about China. People are talking about China in terms of them devaluing their currency and becoming more competitive in terms of their export sector. That's an economy with a much, much higher productivity rate than South Africa.
Talking about the devaluation of the Chinese currency, that's affected our rand. So has the possibility of rates going up in America, for example. Now, if we come back to the retailers, Massmart, owned by Walmart, it's been importing a lot of things, and it's really been hit by the weak rand. Not a good outlook there. I guess some of the unions would say, we told you so. They said you should rely on local suppliers. Do you think there will be some of that?
Yeah, you can rely on local suppliers, but again, back to the point, which goods are more competitive? You might find that at some point it's cheaper to import than buy local. It depends on how competitive it is for Massmart or any other retailer for that matter to buy and stock up their shelves. Earlier on your insight, you talked about inflation numbers, you talked about retail sales, the fact that Shoprite is doing well, mass market is not doing that well. You will see as a consumer that there is a lot of competition between retailers, and that's what has kept price a bit lower despite the weaker rand. There's been a lot of competition between retailers, and I think that is some benefit to the consumer, but it doesn't really benefit the bottom line.
So they have to keep prices down, and it does seem like
some of the costs themselves.
Yeah, like the pie is not getting bigger. So Shoprite is eating market share from other consumers. It's the winner right now, even though Walmart is good with supply chains. Shoprite is winning. Staying with Massmart, do you think that investors will look at this and be turned off South Africa? other investors have also complained that we have conditions that, on people coming in, and that it's not always easy to make it in this market. Or am I overblowing that?
It's not always easy to make it in the South African market, I would agree, given that the fact that the local suppliers know the market and have been in it for a long time. However, it's even worse to come into South Africa, where for the past few years, growth has been consistently undershooting forecast. And if growth is undershooting forecast, you can depend on it that we're not creating new jobs. As you said, the share of the pie is not getting bigger. So the consumer market, South Africans who can go out there and buy, are not, that's not growing. Employment prospects for those who do have jobs, given the fact that the economy is weak, you cannot afford to give above average, above inflation salary increases. And therefore, disposable income becomes under pressure. We're spending, France is mostly financed by debt, and that also is reaching its ceilings. You can only borrow so much to finance current expenditure.
And this one thing leads to another, because we're also facing another interest rate hike, possibly, which could tip over those indebted consumers. Now, it all depends, possibly what happens in the United States, something expected tonight from the Fed Open Market Committee. What do you expect with US interest rates and us in pursuit in coming months?
So if we get some clear indication that by the end of the year, definitely the US will rate interest rates, I think this meeting, the next meeting in September, the bank might decide to hold back, given the weak state of the economy. It's really for the bank between a rock and hard place. Increasing rates is going to undermine consumption expenditure, further weaken the economy. However, they need to start mitigating against a potential increase in interest rate in the US, which is going to further weaken the rand. And if you further weaken the rand, you can be sure that you're going to import inflation into the country. So if they do increase in the US, we need to anticipate that. But in the last meeting, which is in November, perhaps the Reserve Bank might consider raising rates, although they are doing it at an incrementally lower rate than they used to do in the past.
Okay, so you're looking towards the end of the year,
yes,
possibly next year,
yes,
if there's a delay in anything. And inflation is crucial, so it's up to 5%. Our ceiling is 6%. What's really sad, if you look at it, water, electricity, those huge hikes that we saw in July. The petrol price went up, it's come down, but this isn't prices going up because everybody wants the same goods. It's things that we have to buy.
Yeah, it's actually not a demand push one, is actually from the supply side, because it's administered prices which are going up, and these are prices that even the lower income people cannot avoid. If you have inflation increasing in imported luxury goods, is a different matter altogether. Those high income clients can absorb an increase in inflation quicker than people on the lower income level. So if you have administered prices of needed necessities going up, you depreciate further the ability of the people on the lower income to go and spend on food, for instance.
Yeah. Incredibly sad, not looking good for our consumer. Thank you very much. Consumer economist from Liberty, Tendani Mantshimulu.